At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aurum. Let's begin. The Gixian recruiter asked the question without looking up, a gesture Russell found both insulting and deeply reassuring. Reassuring since the bureaucrat failed to recognize him, insulting for the same reason. The multi-limbed official kept 3 of its 4 sinuous arms tapping at different datapads, its bulbous head swiveled between screens, a motion so smooth and repetitive it suggested thousands of applicants had received the same non-attention. The air in the recruitment hub on the terminus tasted thick enough to chew, a pungent stew of overworked circuitry, the metallic bite from the air scrubbers, and the collective body odor of a dozen different species sweating out their desperation under flickering lumen strips. Next. Name. The Gixian droned. The universal translator clipped to its collar, rendering the words in a flat, metallic monotone. Russell. Species. One appendage paused its typing on the central datapad for a fraction of a second. The Gixian muttered, its own voice a series of clicks and whistles beneath the translator's drone. Human. Sector 9K. Let's see. Classified as baseline annoyance in the standard threat index. The tapping resumed. Right. Special skills. Certifications. List all relevant combat proficiencies, vehicle operation licenses, and hazardous material handling permits. Be specific. Russell leaned back in the magnetically clamped chair. The chair groaned under his weight, a sound of protest on a station built for a galactic standard of 3/4 Earth gravity. He allowed himself a small, tired smile that failed to reach his eyes. Existing. The recruiter's appendages continued their dance for a moment, the brain behind them clearly parsing the response as an error. Invalid entry, it said automatically. Please specify a recognized skill. Existing is a biological state, not a marketable talent. Not where I'm from, Russell countered, his smile widening into a smirk. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on the desk, and forced the recruiter to finally look at him. See, the not dying part of living is a full-time job. I'm from Earth. Silence. The quiet spread like a creeping stain, a slow stillness that replaced the hubbub of the room. The recruiter's 4 arms froze, its ocular cluster, a trio of independently tracking stalks, swiveled upwards with a reluctant hum to converge on Russell's face. The pupils, vertical slits of black, blew wide in unison. Holy shit, the translator squawked, the monotone cracking with something that sounded suspiciously like terror. You live on Earth? The words, amplified by the station's ambient comms, echoed through the cavernous hall. The low chatter of desperate mercs died. The clanking of armored boots stopped. A hulking Rhodian in the queue behind Russell, who polished a plasma cannon the size of a torpedo, slowly lowered his weapon. 2 Avianthi assassins, deep in a haggle over a bounty puck, glanced at Russell, then at each other, and quietly backed toward the exit. The entire room, a moment ago a busy nexus of galactic desperation, now held its breath. The Gixian recruiter, suddenly a blur of panicked movement, stamped a glowing approved stamp onto Russell's datapad with a resounding thwack. Its other appendages scrambled to slide the pad across the desk as if it were radioactive. You're hired, yes, very hired, it stammered. Hangar Bay 12. The expedition sponsored by the Atrian Consortium. Now, go, please, just go. Russell picked up the datapad, the warmth of the fresh approval stamp seeping through his glove. He gave the terrified recruiter a 2-fingered salute and turned to leave. As he walked through the now parting sea of galactic soldiers for hire, he heard two mercs whispering behind him, their voices hushed but carrying in the unnatural quiet.
"That's him, Russell. The Axiom Core washout from the Galaxy 581 disaster."
The other sneered, the sound a wet, guttural rasp.
Figures. They say only a human from Earth could have survived that reactor breach. Built tougher, but break easy when it really counts.
Russell's jaw tightened. The old, familiar ache, a bitter mix of rage, guilt, and the crushing weight of a truth no one would ever believe, twisted in his gut. He faced forward, silent, and walked towards Hangar Bay 12. The weight of his son's future felt heavier than any lie the galaxy wanted to tell about him. Hangar Bay 12 was a sterile, white bubble of privilege, a stark contrast to the recruitment hub's grime and desperation. It smelled of ionized air and new shipblading. Dominating the space was the Cartographer's Folly, a long-range exploration vessel of sleek lines and polished chrome. It looked less like a ship for a treasure hunt on a death world and more like a billionaire's yacht that took a wrong turn at a nebula. Waiting for him at the base of the boarding ramp stood three figures who looked just as out of place as the ship. The one in the center, clearly the leader, was an avianthe. Tall and slender, a plumage of feathers that shifted from deep violet to a coppery green crowned his head, likely costing more than Russell's last 3 apartments combined. His 4 eyes, set in a diamond pattern, swiveled independently. 2 focused on Russell's face, 1 on his gear, and the 4th seemed to appraise the hangar ceiling's structural integrity. His posture was a masterclass in detached arrogance. To his right stood a Rhodian, a bipedal mountain of muscle and gray, plated skin. He had the build of a cargo loader, with arms as thick as support beams and a stoic expression that suggested he knew the exact force required to snap Russell in half. He held a heavy-bore pulse cannon with a deeply unsettling casualness. On the leader's left was a Fenrir female, lean and graceful, with feline features and a pair of large, mobile ears that twitched, sampling the hangar's acoustics. A targeting visor, flickering with data streams, covered her wide, luminous eyes. She remained utterly still, a predator waiting for the slightest hint of a threat. The avianthe stepped forward, his movements small and deliberate, each step placed as if on a delicate grid. He looked Russell up and down, his beak-like mouth twisting into a sneer of undisguised contempt.
"You must be the specimen,"
he said, his translated voice terse with condescending disdain.
"The local consultant the consortium insisted upon. I am Dr. Olin, head of this expedition. Let me be unequivocally clear. You were not my choice."
He gestured vaguely at Russell with a 3-fingered hand.
The consortium's board of directors, in their infinite and baffling wisdom, harbor a romantic notion that your species' singular talent for surviving in filth is a somehow transferable skill. I, for the record, remain thoroughly unconvinced. My field is xenoarchaeology, not xenobiotics. Try not to touch anything priceless.
Before Russell could offer a suitably sarcastic reply, the Fenrir spoke, her voice a clipped monotone, each word enunciated with the same weight.
"Subject's biology is consistent with a Class 12 world designation,"
she reported, her head tilted slightly as if she listened to something Russell couldn't hear.
"High-density musculature, skeletal structure reinforced with elevated calcium deposits. Scans indicate redundant organ systems, specifically the liver and kidneys, likely adapted to process extreme toxicity levels.
She paused, her ear twitching.
His exhaled breath contains trace elements my databanks identify as industrial solvents and aerolized pollutants.
Russell grinned, the expression feeling tight and foreign on his face. Yeah, we call it air. The Rhodian let out a short, rumbling sound that might have been a chuckle. It sounded like a rock slide starting.
I am Urso,
he grunted, his voice like gravel in a blender. He gave Russell a single evaluative nod, his gaze lingering on Russell's shoulders and thighs.
You are denser than you look.
Comes from gravity trying to turn you into a pancake every second of your life, Russell said. It's a great motivator for leg day. Nadia, the Fenrir, continued her scan, ignoring the banter.
Subject carries standard mercenary kit, albeit of a dated design, 30 meters of high-tensile composite line, an insta-welder canister, 3 military-grade ration bars, composition primarily carbohydrates, and a nutrient gel that smells vaguely of salted nuts, and a legacy chemically fueled combustion device.
Russell poured a worn silver lighter from his belt pouch and flicked it open. A steady flame bloomed in the sterile hanger. It's called a lighter, cat lady, he said, snapping it shut. For lighting victory cigars. Or, setting things on fire. It's versatile. Olin looked as though he had just swallowed a bug.
A victory cigar? Your species celebrates desecrating ancient historical sites with celebratory carcinogens?
Only the fun ones, Russell said, his grin now genuine. He looked from Olin's appalled expression to Urso's impassive face to Nadia's analytical stare. This was going to be a long trip. So, when do we get to this death world you're all so worried about? I'm on a bit of a deadline. The cartographer's folly landed on Ganthuun with a whisper-soft thud, an insult to the planet's sheer oppressive hostility. The moment the ramp hissed open, the outside world assaulted the ship. A wall of humid, cloying air, thick with the smell of alien decay and supersaturated pollen, rolled in. The jungle pulsed with a violent, phosphorescent riot of colors that had no business in nature. This light, sourceless and unsettling, made the ship's interior lighting feel weak and anemic. Olin, Urso, and Nadia were encased in state-of-the-art environmental suits, their helmets displaying a constant stream of atmospheric data and biohazard warnings. Russell stepped onto the ramp in a simple pressure-sealed jumpsuit, his helmet retracted. He took a deep, deliberate breath, his lungs, conditioned by a lifetime of breathing Earth's unique chemical cocktail, easily filtering the alien air. He nodded in appreciation. Smells like home, he said. Specifically, a paper mill next to a swamp in Louisiana during pollen season. Nostalgic. Olin strode past him, his suit moving with a silent whir of servos. His 4 eyes fixed on a massive, vine-choked temple entrance visible through the writhing trees. According to my orbital scans and a translation of the Ganthuun star charts I cross-referenced myself, the path to the temple entrance is a designated ceremonial causeway, he announced, his voice tinny over the comms. Perfectly safe. The architects valued symmetry and order. They wouldn't sully their approach with wilderness. He took a confident step off the ramp onto the mossy ground. Follow my lead and... He never finished the sentence. Russell moved with a sudden explosive speed that defied his mass. He closed the distance in a single bound, his body slamming into the lanky avianthe with the force of a freight train. Olin let out a shocked squawk, his academic dignity vanishing in a puff of flailing limbs as he hit the ground. He felt as if a grav hauler had struck him. A heartbeat later, a thick green vine, which looked no different than the thousands of others hanging from the canopy, whipped down from above. A gaping, flower-like maw at its tip, lined with rows of serrated volcanic glass thorns, snapped shut with an audible thwump where Olin's helmeted head had been a second before. The thorns ground together with a sound like shattering glass. The crew stared in shocked silence. The creature, a vine maw, thrashed in the air, its maw snapping hungrily. Russell got to his feet and brushed dirt and alien moss from his jumpsuit. He picked up a fallen branch and casually poked the creature. It bit the branch in half with a vicious crunch. "On Earth, we call that a nope rope," Russell said into the stunned silence of the comm channel. "This one's a little guy, though. Usually they're bigger and have venom that can dissolve your skeleton before you hit the ground." He offered a hand to the sputtering Olin. "Rule 1 of places like this, Doc, the path is never safe. The path is just where the traps are aimed." Urso looked from the struggling creature to Russell, then back again. A flicker of respect crossed his stony features. Nadia, for her part, simply updated her internal threat assessment, her gaze now tracking the human's movements with a predator's focus. Olin, however, just glared, his feathers ruffled in every sense of the word. They reached the temple entrance, a monolithic maw of black stone carved into the towering cliff face. The scale was humbling, designed to make any visitor feel insignificant. The etched hall floor stretched before them, a single unbroken slab of polished jet that reflected the lurid jungle light like a dark mirror. Glyphs, ancient and complex, were carved into the walls from floor to ceiling. Olin, having regained some of his composure, approached the threshold, his 4 eyes alight with academic fervor.
Incredible! This is a pre-Reformation dialect. Note the third-person honorific conjugation. They're not speaking of a trial, they're speaking to the stone itself. It's a test of worthiness, a spiritual invocation.
He puffed out his narrow chest.
One must walk the path with a pure heart and unwavering faith. It is purely symbolic.
My heart's as pure as recycled station water, and my faith is in a power cell, Russell muttered. He turned to the Fenrir. Whiskers, what do your ears say? Nadia's head was tilted, her large ears swiveling in minute arcs. She emitted a series of subtle, inaudible sonic pulses.
The floor density ahead is inconsistent,
she reported, her voice calm but her ears twitching with agitation.
Significant voids lie beneath the surface at irregular intervals. The walls are hollow. I detect dormant machinery and what sounds like a high-pressure gas propulsion system.
Olin scoffed, the sound a dismissive hiss over the comms.
Of course, for a harmless ceremonial display of light or mist. It's meant to awe, not to harm. Watch a true scholar at work.
He took a step towards the jet-black floor. Hold your horses, Professor. Russell walked past the indignant Avianthe, not into the hall, but to where the jungle floor met the temple's foundation. A slight incline led up to the entrance, littered with loose rock. Russell eyed a heavy, oblong boulder wedged between 2 tree roots, a chunk of volcanic rock about the size of a small engine block. He braced his feet, wrapped his arms around the rough stone, and heaved. A grunt tore from his throat. The rock refused to budge. He repositioned, found better grip, and pulled again, his muscles straining, cords standing out on his neck. The boulder shifted, scraping against the dirt. Urso watched, his helmet's internal sensors analyzing the strain on the human's muscles. The readout was surprising. The sheer effort Russell expended would have been a simple shove for a Rhodian. With a final desperate roar of exertion, Russell got the boulder moving. He shoved it with his shoulder, rolling it end over end up the short incline and into the entrance hall. It rumbled across the polished jet and came to a rest near the center with a soft thud. For a full 3 seconds, nothing happened. Olin opened his mouth to deliver a scathing "I told you so." Then, the floor section directly beneath the rock vanished, dropping the boulder into a black, bottomless pit. Simultaneously, with vicious thunks, hidden slits in the walls shot a dozen poisoned darts, each the size of a human forearm and tipped with a wicked-looking barb. They crossed the space where the team would have been standing and embedded themselves deep into the stone on the far side of the corridor. A black, viscous fluid dripped from the tips, sizzling as it hit the floor. After the darts hit, the only sound was the sizzling drip of the poison. Russell leaned against the doorframe, breathing heavily and wiping sweat from his brow. Yeah, purely symbolic, he panted. He turned to Nadia. Good call, Whiskers. You saved our pompous friend from becoming a very well-educated pincushion. Nadia gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, her ears flicking once in his direction. It was the Fenrir equivalent of a thumbs up. Olin just stood there, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly, processing the near-death experience with the slow, grinding horror of a theorist being mugged by reality. Deeper inside the temple, the grand halls gave way to narrow, claustrophobic corridors. The air grew colder, and so dry it felt like it leached the moisture from their lungs. The stillness was oppressive, broken only by the drip of unseen water and the hum of their suit systems. Urso took the lead, his heavy cannon ready, followed by Nadia, Olin, and Russell covering the rear. They were halfway down a long, straight passage when the floor plates ahead of Urso retracted with a grinding screech of ancient stone. A dark pit opened, and from its depths rose a sound, a dry, chittering rustle that grew in volume to a deafening roar. A glistening, living tide of jet-black beetles, each the size of Russell's fist, poured over the pit's edge. Their segmented shells clicked and scraped against the stone as they swarmed upwards, a river of hungry, armored death.
Flesh borers! Shells rated against standard energy weapons!
Nadia's voice was sharp, laced with the first hint of alarm Russell had heard from her.
Hold the line! Concentrated fire!
Olin shrieked from the middle of the group. Urso needed no prompting. He opened fire, his pulse cannon unleashing a volley of brilliant blue plasma bolts into the oncoming swarm. The bolts hit the beetles with explosive force, splattering molten shell and foul-smelling yellow guts across the corridor. The superheated plasma seemed only to enrage the swarm. For every dozen they vaporized, 100 more surged forward, crawling over the charred remains of their kin. The vapor released by the incinerated beetles was thick and acrid, causing the alien suit sensors to blare with chemical warnings.
Fall back! Cauterize the passage! Seal the door!
Olin yelled, his voice bordering on panic. Russell, however, just looked annoyed.
Are you kidding me? Don't waste the ammo on bugs!
He pushed past the frozen Olin. Hey, Rhino Man, give me some room! Urso, surprised, lowered his cannon and took a half-step back. Russell stepped into the breach with an expression of weary exasperation. With a complete lack of ceremony, he brought his heavy magnetic boot down on the lead beetle with a sickening crunch. He then pulled the insta-weld canister and his lighter from his utility belt.
Legacy combustion device,
he muttered, flicking the lighter open. With an ease that bespoke years of similar improvisations, he jammed the lighter's flame in front of the canister's nozzle and squeezed the trigger. He answered the swarm with pure, glorious fire. No plasma, no lasers, just a roaring jet of ignited, sticky sealant erupting down the corridor. The makeshift flamethrower washed over the front ranks of the beetle swarm, incinerating them instantly and creating a blazing, impassable barrier of burning, adhesive goo. The chittering was replaced by a high-pitched squeal as the creatures burned, and the acrid smell of their vapor was overwhelmed by the stench of burning chemicals and cooked shell. The tide of insects faltered, recoiling from the wall of flame. Russell held the stream for another 5 seconds, pushing them back into their pit, before he released the trigger and snapped his lighter shut. He tucked both items back into his belt. He turned to his stunned crewmates, who stared at the wall of fire and the smoking pile of beetle carcasses. "You guys never had camping trips?" he asked, his voice deadpan. "First rule of camping. You always gotta deal with the bugs." They found a defensible antechamber off the main corridor, a circular room with a single entrance. The fire from Russell's improvised flamethrower had burned itself out, leaving a blackened, impassable mess of hardened sealant and charred beetle husks. It bought them time. They set up a perimeter, placing a few glow rods in the room's center that cast long, dancing shadows on the glyph-covered walls. The silence after the chaos was charged. Urso field-stripped his cannon with heavy, deliberate motions. Olin paced, muttering about desecration and lost data. Russell sat on a low stone bench, cleaning his sidearm. It was Nadia who finally spoke, her voice cutting through the quiet. She perched atop a fallen pillar, her analytical gaze fixed on Russell.
Your risk assessment is illogical for a standard mercenary contract,
she stated, her voice devoid of accusation, pure observation.
The potential reward fails to justify this level of personal exposure. You operate with a desperation that exceeds financial motivation. What is your true objective?
Russell stopped cleaning his weapon. Olin paused his pacing. Urso's heavy hands stilled. The sarcastic shield of deadpan humor Russell wore finally slipped. In the flickering light of the glow rods, the exhaustion etched on his face was stark and raw. "Yeah, there's an artifact in this place," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual bravado. "The healing core of Ganthuun." He took a breath, the sound rough and heavy. My son, Mateo. He has regressive cytosis, genetic decay. It's a 1 in a billion fluke, a random misprint in his DNA. His cells are forgetting how to be cells. He won't live out the standard year without the core. The chamber fell silent. The only sound was the distant drip of water. The weight of his words settled over them, heavier and more dangerous than any physical threat they had faced. Olin sat down heavily on a block of stone. Nadia's ears, which had been erect and alert, drooped slightly. Urso looked at the human, his expression unreadable.
Galaxies 581,
he stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact needing context.
The official Axiom Corps report said you broke regulations, that your reckless improvisation caused the reactor breach.
Russell finally looked up, his eyes hard and bright with a pain that went far beyond the temple.
The plan was
perfect, he said, his voice laced with a bitter irony. Sterile, meticulously calculated, by the book. We were supposed to slice in, plant the virus, and slice out. But the core we hit had upgraded their security safeguards. The book failed to account for that. He stared into the darkness beyond their small circle of light, seeing a ghost from his past. When the alarms went off and the reactor went critical, the book told everyone to hold position and wait for updated orders that were never going to come. We were 30 floors below ground in a sealed facility that was about to become a small star. I tried to get them out. I blew a conduit off the wall and made a path through a sealed blast door. My reckless improvisation saved one of them. For 12 minutes, before the radiation got him. The official report just said I broke procedure and survived. That was cheaper for Axiom Corps. Cheaper than admitting their intel was bad and their plan was a death sentence. He picked up his pistol and resumed cleaning it, his movements mechanical. The quiet that followed was different. It felt heavy with a new, somber understanding. As they pushed deeper into the temple's core, the nature of the traps began to change. The mechanical and biological threats gave way to something far more insidious. The architecture itself seemed to warp around them. The air grew heavy, tasting of static electricity, and a low, subsonic hum vibrated through the stone. The Guardian, the Sanctum's true protector, had awakened. It was a psionic monster, and it began to probe their minds, preying on their deepest desires. Olin was the first to fall. He stopped dead in a vast, crumbling chamber, his 4 eyes wide with wonder.
It's beautiful,
he whispered. Ahead of him, where Russell saw only a collapsed wall and rubble, the Avianthe saw a grand, glowing library.
Historical validation,
Olin muttered, and walked towards it, completely oblivious to the sheer drop just beyond the illusory floor. Then it hit Urso. The Rhodian grunted, his eyes widening. The pile of rubble in the room's corner transformed, in his mind, into a massive vault door, slightly ajar. From within spilled a river of lustrous, priceless precursor alloy ingots, enough to buy his entire clan's freedom.
The debt, it's paid,
he growled, taking a heavy step towards the mirage. Nadia stopped last, her body freezing. Before her, a glowing portal had opened. Through it, she saw a verdant, sun-drenched world of sweeping plains and soaring structures. Her people's lost homeworld, exactly as the song maps of the elders had described it. Tears welled in her eyes, and she took a hesitant step forward, her hand outstretched. The Guardian saved its cruelest trick for Russell. It reached into his mind, pulling forth the image he cherished most. A vision of his son, Mateo, appeared out of the thin air. This Mateo was healthy, his cheeks full, his eyes bright. He ran towards Russell across a field of green earth grass.
"Daddy!"
the vision cried. But it was wrong. The laugh was a fraction too high-pitched. The shade of brown in Mateo's eyes was off, and the way he ran, his gait was perfect. The real Mateo, even before he got sick, had a slight, endearing limp from a broken leg that healed funny. This subtle error filled Russell with a surge of pure, cold, protective fury. This thing, this psychic parasite, wore his son's face like a disguise. He saw the wavering psionic energy overlaying reality for what it was, a trap. He lunged, his hand grabbing Nadia's arm just as her foot was about to step off a crumbling ledge into a bottomless pit hidden by the illusion. He yanked her back with all his might.
"It's not real!"
he snarled, his voice a raw, ragged thing, shaking with a rage so profound it was almost a physical force.
"It's a parasite! It's feeding on what you want! Don't you dare give it the satisfaction!"
The raw, grief-fueled anger in his voice was a physical shockwave. It shattered the illusions. Olin's library dissolved into a rockfall. Urso's vault became a pile of rubble. Nadia's homeworld vanished, leaving the yawning abyss at her feet. They were left shaken and disoriented in the true, crumbling corridor, the echoes of their deepest desires fading into the oppressive quiet. And for the first time, they felt the Guardian's true emotion. Cold, calculating anger. The enraged Guardian decided a more direct approach was in order. Stone slabs slammed down, sealing the corridor. They were trapped in a vast circular chamber. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and from them new swarms of flesh-boring beetles poured forth. At the same time, 4 towering stone statues began to move, their heavy footfalls shaking the temple's very foundations. A disembodied, mocking laughter echoed from the very stones, the psychic pressure intensifying to a physical pain behind the eyes.
We're boxed in. Multiple threats. All vectors.
Nadia reported, her voice strained. She unleashed a focused sonic blast that shattered the lead statue's head, but its body kept marching forward.
We're doomed. This is a no-win scenario.
They were out of options, running on adrenaline and dwindling ammunition.
"Form a defensive circle!"
Russell yelled, his voice cutting through the rising panic.
"Rotational fire! Cover all arcs!"
He watched as his crewmates moved to comply, but then Olin screamed, clutching his helmet.
My translator! It's spouting gibberish!
The Guardian's psychic assault corrupted their tech. The translator in Urso's helmet crackled, twisting Russell's clear command into a garbled mess.
Error. Syntax conflict. Rerouting.
"Initiate rotation. Fire indiscriminately."
The result was a beautiful, terrifying, and utterly idiotic ballet of destruction. Instead of forming a static circle, the 3 aliens began to spin in place, firing their advanced weaponry wildly. Russell dove headfirst behind a fallen pillar and covered his head. A blue plasma bolt screamed past his ear, struck the far wall, and sizzled a molten line across the ceiling before it vaporized a piece of stone 3 inches from his boot. A high-frequency hum told him Nadia's sonic blast had just bounced off Urso's backplate. It was like being trapped in a deadly pinball machine.
"Not like that, you idiots!"
He screamed over the cacophony.
"A static firing position! Point the hurty ends outward!"
A stray, ricocheting shot from Urso's cannon struck a lumbering statue in the knee, shattered the joint, and sent it crashing to the ground. Nadia's wildly spinning sonic pulses, purely by accident, intersected at a perfect resonant frequency in the room's center. The resulting resonance bubble expanded outwards, struck a particularly dense swarm of beetles, and caused them to detonate in a massive, simultaneous shower of black ichor. The room was suddenly, violently, and almost completely cleared. The aliens stopped spinning, dizzy and panting, their weapons smoking. Urso leaned against a wall, his heavy suit respirators heaving.
I will admit,
He wheezed, his voice ragged.
that was unexpectedly effective.
Russell cautiously peeked out from behind the pillar. He was covered in dust and small rock fragments.
"Effective? I nearly got a plasma haircut and sonic colonoscopy at the same time. You call that effective?"
The chaotic firefight had done more than just clear the room. It had fatally destabilized it. The main exit was completely buried under a rock slide. The ceiling groaned ominously, shedding a constant rain of dust. They were trapped. While Olin sputtered about catastrophic structural failure, Russell's mind went quiet. The chaos melted away. All that was left was the problem and the goal. Get the core. Get to Mateo.
All right, new plan. We make our own exit.
He strode to the center of the room.
Urso, your turn to be the scalpel.
He pointed to a massive, load-bearing pillar on the far side of the chamber.
Hit that pillar, right at the base. Weaken it, but don't bring it down yet. I want it ready to tip.
Urso, without question, nodded and lumbered over. The dynamic had shifted. Russell was no longer the specimen. He was the only one with a plan that involved something other than screaming. Russell turned to the Fenrir.
Nadia, give me a reading. Find the single biggest structural weak point in the ceiling directly above that far wall.
Nadia, now trusting his chaotic logic, closed her eyes and focused, sending out a single, powerful sonic pulse.
There.
She said, her own eyes snapping open and pointing.
A convergence of microfractures. A significant focused impact would trigger a chain reaction collapse.
A savage grin split Russell's face.
Perfect.
He went to work. He scavenged a high-yield power cell from a broken rifle. He unspooled the last of his composite line. He had salvaged one of the pressure plates from the first trap. With a focused speed born of 1,000 similar desperate gambles, he jury-rigged a powerful directional demolition charge. He wasn't trying to outsmart the temple. He was going to punch a hole through its goddamn wall. His alien crewmates watched, a mixture of horror and awe in their faces as he worked with a raw intensity they'd never seen. Russell planted the charge, aimed it at the weak point Nadia had found, and ran the line back to their position.
Urso, on my mark, you drop that pillar on the pressure plate. The line will pull taut, complete the circuit, and boom. Got it?
Urso grunted in affirmation.
Everyone else, get behind something solid!
Russell yelled, taking cover himself.
Mark!
The pulse cannon roared. The base of the pillar exploded. The massive stone column began to topple and crashed down directly on the pressure plate. The line snapped taut, the power cell overloaded. The explosion was a dirty, thunderous detonation that ripped a ragged, gaping hole in the chamber wall. Rock and dust blew inwards, revealing the room beyond, the temple's heart. It was a vast, silent vacuum. In the very center, floating serenely above a pedestal, was the healing core. It pulsed with a soft, warm, golden light. As they stepped through the jagged opening, the air crackled and carried the sharp scent of superheated stone. Dust and shadows began to coalesce. The Guardian manifested fully. It rose from the floor, a towering, semi-corporeal wraith of swirling energy and bandage-like tatters. 2 points of burning, hateful light glared from where its eyes should be. Its voice boomed, a sound felt in the bones.
You have desecrated this holy sanctum. Your greed, your desperation. It ends here. Leave now and be forgotten, or stay and join the dust.
The sheer psychic pressure was overwhelming. Olin stumbled back, whimpering. Nadia hissed. Urso braced himself. Russell, however, took a step forward. He was bruised and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He spat a wad of bloody saliva onto the polished floor. He looked up at the 10-meter-tall spectral horror and grinned, a feral, defiant expression.
"Sorry, buddy,"
he said, his voice raspy.
"We're not here for the tomb. We're here for the loot. And on Earth, tombs belong to us. We call it archaeology."
The final confrontation began not with a bang, but with a taunt.
"Is that all you got?"
Russell yelled, dodging a spectral claw that tore through the air where he'd been standing.
"I've had hangovers that hit harder than that."
Russell, objective!
Nadia's voice crackled over the comm. While Russell played Matador with the enraged Wraith, the other three scrambled towards the sanctum's entrance to secure the prize. Urso was prying open a gilded chest for Olin, while Nadia carefully lifted a data relic from its pedestal. Russell's plan was simple: keep the big ghost busy. He led it on a chase across the chamber, weaving between pillars, its destination clear: the massive, crumbling archway directly above the central pedestal where the healing core still floated.
"You are an insect,"
The Guardian boomed, its form dissolving into smoke and rematerializing behind him.
"a fleeting nuisance."
Yeah, heard it all before."
Russell grunted, ducking under a sweeping blast of psionic energy.
"You're a glorified security guard who's been asleep on the job for 10,000 years. Time to face your eviction."
The enraged Guardian finally abandoned its ranged attacks. It lunged, its body phasing through a solid stone column to reappear directly in front of him.
"I am eternal. You are fragile, mate."
It bellowed. Russell leaped aside the last possible second. As the Guardian's form solidified, he slapped the last of his explosives, a smaller, shaped charge, onto the archway's central keystone. He rolled away and hit the trigger on his comm unit.
"Meat's back on the menu, pal!"
he yelled. The shaped charge detonated with a sharp crack. The keystone shattered. With a deafening, grinding groan, the entire archway gave way. Tons of ancient rock crashed down, burying the Guardian in the wreckage of its own sanctum. The psychic pressure vanished. The hateful, burning eyes winked out. The booming voice was silenced. Silence. Dust, thick and choking, filled the chamber. The only light came from the still glowing healing core, its gentle pulse a beacon in the gloom. The surviving crew, bruised and battered, staggered out from behind their cover. They had done it. They were alive. They made their way back through the hole in the wall into the now quiet jungle of Ganthuun. The journey back to the ship was a silent, exhausted march. They were laden with treasure. Urso had a heavy chest of priceless precursor alloys strapped to his back, humming with latent energy, more than enough to buy his clan's freedom 10 times over. Nadia clutched a data relic to her chest. It hummed with the faint, melodic echo of her people's lost star charts, a map home. Olin, humbled and uncharacteristically quiet, carried a satchel heavy with scrolls that would, despite his abject field failures, still make him the most famous xenoarchaeologist in the galaxy. And Russell had the healing core secured in a containment case under one arm. Over his other shoulder, he had 2 heavy bags filled with golden relics and glowing gemstones he'd scooped up on the way out. Urso raised an eyebrow plate, the gesture surprisingly expressive on his rugged face.
"Thought you were only here for the core, Earthman."
Russell shrugged, a tired, pained grin spreading across his grimy face.
"Kid needs medicine,"
he said, his voice raspy.
"But college isn't cheap either."
A rare, genuine laugh rumbled from Urso's deep chest. It was a good sound, the sound of survival, the sound of a job against all odds well done. The medical room was white, so white it hurt the eyes after the temple's gloom. It smelled of antiseptic and despair. Russell sat by his son's bed, the hum and beep of the life support monitors a rhythm he had come to hate. Mateo was so small, so pale, lost in the crisp white sheets. Russell opened the containment case. The healing core floated out, its warm, golden light filling the sterile room. He held it over his son. "Come on, you beautiful, overpriced piece of alien tech," he whispered. "Do your thing." As if hearing him, the core pulsed once, brightly, then dissolved. It became a stream of golden light, a waterfall of pure life energy that flowed into Mateo's small, frail body. The change was immediate. Color bloomed in his son's cheeks. The frantic, shallow rhythm on the heart monitor smoothed out into a steady, healthy beat. The boy's eyelids fluttered. They opened. They were clear, free of pain. "Dad," Mateo whispered, his voice stronger and clearer than it had been in months. "I had a weird dream." Russell felt a sob catch in his throat, a raw, powerful emotion he had refused to feel for years. He reached out and squeezed his son's hand. "Me too, kid," he choked out. "Me too." Later that week, his wife, Tessa, found him in the garage. He was trying, and failing, to find a place to stash a 4-foot-tall solid gold statue of a glowering architect. Next to it was a chest overflowing with humming crystals and several heavy, gray ingots that made the concrete floor sag. She looked at the alien horde, then at him, her eyes wide with 1,000 questions. Russell just smirked, pulling her into a hug that smelled faintly of superheated stone and ancient dust. "Retirement fund," he said into her hair. "Unless you want me running back into tombs every other month to make the mortgage." She hugged him back tightly, burying her face in his shoulder. For the first time in a very long time, they both knew he wouldn't have to. Weeks later, back on Terminus, the same Gixian recruiter reviewed the Atrian Consortium's official mission report from Ganthuun. Its multiple eye stalks bobbled as it scrolled through the summary, its placid, bureaucratic calm evaporating with every line it read. Mission debrief, Ganthuun expedition. Team, Olin, Avianthi, Urso, Rhodian, Nadia, Fenrir, Russell, Human. Summary. Entry to site achieved via non-standard kinetic testing of primary entrance trap. Subterranean insectoid infestation neutralized via unsanctioned use of improvised incendiary device. See attached invoice for InstaWeld. Psionic field interference resulted in translation hardware failure, causing a literal friendly fire incident described by the human consultant as tactical spinning. Subsequent structural instability necessitated unsanctioned percussive demolition to create alternate egress. Primary objective, healing core, and secondary objectives, data relics, historical scrolls, precursor alloys, secured. Legendary Class A psionic entity, the Guardian, neutralized via deliberate architectural destruction of a Class A historical site. Declared treasure haul, astronomical. Sufficient to destabilize the economies of 3 mid-rim systems. Survival rate, 100%. The recruiter's appendages trembled slightly. It pulled up Russell's file again, its cluster of eyes focusing on the single, absurd entry listed under his qualifications. It muttered to itself, the translator rendering its voice in a tone of pure, potent awe and disbelief. Special skills. Existing. Holy hell. He wasn't kidding.